Welcome to the Council of Better Business Bureau's podcast, The Bistro, where we will discuss today's hottest consumer trends, predict the future with consumer experts, and learn how elite businesses and entrepreneurs continue to push the envelope in today's marketplace.
Hello and welcome to The Bistro. For the Better Business Bureau, I'm your host, Elena Spinola. Summertime means fun in the sun, and while we should be wearing sunscreen all year round, it's especially important to protect your skin from painful sunburn and the effects of sun exposure from the powerful summer sun. When choosing your sunscreen, it's important to know they are not all the same, and some are better than others in protecting your skin from harmful UVA and UVB rays. On this episode of The Bistro, we're speaking with Sonya Lunder from the Environmental Working Group, also known as EWG, to help us understand which ingredients we should be looking for and avoiding when choosing a sunscreen, and why it's so important. Sonya is a senior analyst and co-authored The Guide to Sunscreens. Welcome to The Bistro, Sonya.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. This is going to be a great conversation as summer's here and everyone's reaching for the sunscreen. Can you first tell us a little bit about the EWG and its mission?
Yeah, EWG is a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to protecting public health and the environment. I work on the toxics team, and my team examines the health impacts of environmental pollution, as well as the safety of consumer products like sunscreen.
Okay. The EWG has researched and published a sunscreen guide annually for many years. What has your research found, and what impact has this made on the sunscreen industry?
Yeah, for 12 years now, we've been looking at both the safety and the efficacy of sunscreen. We know it's critical to reducing the risk of skin cancer, and we also know that there are a lot of ingredients in sunscreen that may pose concerns ranging from irritation or allergic reactions to actually more serious effects like hastening or increasing your risk of developing skin cancer. So we rate the safety and efficacy of more than 650 beach and sports sunscreens, and over the years, we found that there have been some improvements in the sunscreen market. The FDA put in place new rules in 2011 that banned misleading terms like waterproof and sweatproof, but they also proposed rules like capping SPF values at 50 plus that they haven't yet enacted. Our work is to draw attention to the shortcomings in sunscreen regulation and also highlight better products for people to pick. We find that 2/3 of the sunscreens we examined this year are deficient in either sun protection or they include worrisome ingredients like oxybenzone, which is a hormone disruptor, or vitamin A, which is linked to increased risk of skin cancer.
Yeah, you mentioned that some of the, words are banned, based on your research, like waterproof and sweatproof. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like I still see those labels on products.
No, actually, now you'll see terms like water resistant.
I see.
Only since 2011 have sunscreen companies actually had to provide testing to show that that the product is water resistant, and then it will be either for 40 or 80 minutes. But there's still a lot of misleading claims. One of the things that we're very concerned about is the really high SPF values, which to consumers really imply a much greater level of protection than they're really receiving from sunscreen. An SPF value of 100 it really implies to somebody that they're fully protected from the sun, when we know that people apply too little to actually get that SPF rating, and it rubs off every time you come out of the water, rub your body with a towel, you're rubbing off that sunscreen. And so people can use these really high SPF products and still get way too much sun exposure on a normal day at the beach.
Yes. You would think it seems like common sense, it's going to wear off over time or you're rubbing it off. But these are such great reminders and really helpful to, protect us and our kids. You mentioned the SPF, and we're going to get into that in a minute here. But let's talk about just some general average consumer tips. What should people know, just the main things that people should keep in mind when choosing a sunscreen?
We recommend that people choose an SPF value less than 50 plus, because that should be sufficient for almost every use. We recommend that people avoid sprays. When you see people spraying sunscreen on the beach, it's important to remember that that creates a cloud of sunscreen particles in the air that people can inhale. And also, they're really prone to under-application. It's easy to miss a spot. And FDA has actually asked sunscreen companies to provide more information about the safety and efficacy of sprays, but not followed up to make a determination about whether or not they actually are safe and effective. We think that lotions give you better coverage. You're less likely to miss an area, and studies show that people put on a thicker coating and get better protection from a lotion. There are also lots of worrisome ingredients, and the fact that FDA has actually set a very low bar for sunscreens to be claiming broad spectrum protection. And so we found that actually half of U.S. products couldn't be sold in Europe where there's a higher standard for broad spectrum or UVA protection from a sunscreen.
Sure. So speaking of UVA, UVB rays, and that term broad spectrum, just help us understand what that means. Because again, the average consumer, we see these things, we buy the spray because it's convenient, we see these terms we want to hear like broad spectrum, but maybe don't fully understand what that means.
Exactly. Well, SPF is a rating of sunburn protection. And one thing that people need to know is it is tested on human volunteers, but those tests are not as robust as they could be. And there have been a lot of studies showing that the SPF value that people get may be really different than what's on the label, especially with those really high numbers. A very small difference in the amount you put on can make a difference between SPF 30, 50, or 100. We also find that most people don't apply enough to get that actual sunburn protection. And even if you prevent a sunburn, when you're using a product without enough protection from UVA rays, which are more numerous, they're lower energy, but they are associated with melanoma and skin aging and immune system suppression. You may not get a sunburn, but if you're using a product that's not protecting you from those invisible sun damages as strongly, you still get too much UV and can suffer some of those ill effects of overexposure to UV.
Okay. Earlier, you had mentioned that some sunscreen ingredients disrupt hormones and can cause skin allergies. What ingredients should consumers be aware of specifically?
Well, FDA hasn't really approved any new sunscreen ingredients for decades. And so as a result, sunscreen manufacturers are doing the best they can and with the ingredients that are allowed for use and the restrictions on the amount that they're allowed to put in. Now, there's some ingredients that have been a mainstay of U.S. sunscreen. The oxybenzone is one that we find in almost every non-mineral sunscreen on the market. And oxybenzone is shown to be a potent anti-androgen. It interferes with the body's hormone system. It's measured in the bodies of nearly every American. It soaks through your skin and can be measured in your blood or in your urine. And there's real concerns that oxybenzone exposure, when you think about sunscreen, it's a product you can apply all over your body several times a day for days on end, that this exposure can be too much, especially for women who are pregnant or kids whose bodies are developing really rapidly. Many ingredients do soak through the skin like that, and as a result, our ratings tend to emphasize zinc oxide and titanium dioxide as the preferred active ingredients because they stay on the skin, they don't soak through, and they're not associated with any kind of disruption to the hormone or other types of toxicity to the body.
Okay, so one more time, that was zinc oxide and or titanium dioxide, is that right?
Yeah, and these are known as mineral sunscreens.
Okay.
They're often marketed as gentle or less allergenic, but you really got to flip the bottle over and see what the active ingredients are there. These are a thicker formulation. Sometimes, people are not as interested in wearing them. They can tint the skin white, so it's important to try them out, see what works for you. But in general, these offer more stable protection. They're not being broken down by the sun rays. And we find that they rate well because they're not associated with skin allergy, skin penetration, or any other types of toxicity to the body.
Okay. In general, are these easy to find, the mineral sunscreens? Would you find them along with all the other brands of sunscreens on the shelves?
We find that since we started doing our sunscreen report, we've seen an increase in the number of mineral sunscreens on the market, and pretty much every major sunscreen brand is now making them. They're often sold as marketed for kids or sensitive skin sunscreens, but you really have to flip over the bottle and read the ingredients to figure out if they're using zinc and titanium or chemicals to prevent sunburn.
Okay, so just like food, you really need to read the list of ingredients. Just don't read the front label. You really need to understand what's in them. Earlier, you mentioned vitamin A, and it's often added to sunscreen. First of all, why is that? And then what is the problem specifically associated with vitamin A in sunscreen?
Vitamin A is an additive in sunscreen. This came to our attention when the National Toxicology Program, which is a part of the government's science branch, found that in laboratory studies, adding vitamin A to a cream that was put on mice actually increased the rate of skin tumors and skin lesions when those mice were exposed to UV light. So we were really surprised to find that it was really common in American sunscreens. And I think that this isn't something that was being tracked by any arm of the government at that point. We've seen that since that study was published and more widely discussed, that there's become less vitamin A added to sunscreens, or it's less common on product labels. Now, we're not exactly sure why it's added or how much is in sunscreens, but we know that in Europe there have been concerns that adding vitamin A to body lotions and cosmetics can also result in too much vitamin A exposure. It's an essential vitamin, and it's important and added in our diets in a form that you can't overdose in. But when you eat too much vitamin A from seafood or in other forms in the diet and use these cosmetics potentially all over your body, there's also a risk that people suffer ill effects from too much vitamin A.
Interesting. I'm thinking here as I'm hearing you speak, I wonder can you go to the doctor and test your levels of vitamin A?
I don't think that would be helpful. It's more important to maybe read up on the dietary sources of vitamin A and also look at the body care products you're using. I know that vitamin A is a potent anti-aging treatment, and when women or men, anyone who's using it, is really cautioned to avoid the sun completely, to wear sunscreen, to wear a hat, because it can also be irritating. So when you're using these potent anti-aging ingredients, you're cautioned to avoid the sun completely. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to us that they'd also be put in sunscreen.
Great caution, because again, a lot of times we are using these things or trying these things because we believe they're good for us, and they could be in small doses, but it's really important to heed the caution. So if you're going to use it, make sure you wear that hat. And if you don't remember to wear the hat, then you might be doing a little bit more harm than good. Speaking of wearing hats and things like that, what other sun safety tips can you share?
Yeah, this research we've done over the last decade has really heightened the fact to us that sunscreen is an imperfect technology. There are ways that American sunscreens could be improved. We could adopt stronger standards and review and approve new safe ingredients that are better able to protect our skin. But in the meantime, it's really important to remember that any light layer of clothing or a hat will offer better protection from the sun than sunscreen. So when it's possible, cover up. We see more kids wearing rash guards. That's just going to be a much more efficient and reliable way to protect your skin from overexposure. Now, you can't cover your body completely, or don't necessarily need to, but when you're using a sunscreen, it's really important to realize that product needs to be applied in a very thick coating and reapplied really frequently. Anytime you come out of the water, rub off with a towel. And sometimes the best strategy is to really avoid those peak hours of the day. Look at the UV index. Think about limiting your time, in the direct sunlight between 10 and 4. It's not really possible to spend a whole day out in the sun, totally relying on sunscreen and really effectively be protecting your skin. It's much better to cover up with a light layer. Doesn't need to be fancy UV protective clothing even. For most people, just a regular layer of clothing is going to offer much better protection than sunscreen.
Okay, well, those are great tips, and definitely has me personally reevaluating what I'm doing at home and what I'm doing with my kids in terms of their sunscreen. Oh, it makes me feel like we're not reapplying enough, and so that's why conversations like this are very helpful. And again, this has been a really awesome discussion overall. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sonya, on the Bistro. Where can our listeners get more sun safety information?
Go to the Environmental Working Group website. You can check out our ratings for 650 sunscreen products, ewg.org/sunscreen.
Excellent. Sonya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Nice talking with you.
The Better Business Bureau is deeply committed to building and advancing a better marketplace, a trusted marketplace for all, because trust always matters. For the Better Business Bureau, and as your host of the Bistro, I'm Elaine Espinola. I thank you for listening, and I encourage you to give us your feedback on this episode. Until next time, it has been my pleasure discussing better business and summer sunscreen safety tips with you.
You just enjoyed the Bistro podcast. Be sure to tune in next month for a brand new episode. To learn more about our other shows, visit betterbusiness.blueberry.com. That's betterbusiness.blueberry.com. blueberry.com and subscribe. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the Better Business Bureau, Council of Better Business Bureaus, or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Blueberry's Terms of Service.